In March 2017, Nintendo released a game that would redefine what open-world games could be. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild didn't just launch alongside the Nintendo Switch, it justified the console's existence. It proved that Nintendo, a company often criticized for being behind the times, could create an open-world experience that made games from Bethesda, Rockstar, and Ubisoft look antiquated by comparison. This wasn't just another Zelda game, it was a revolution disguised as a return to the series' roots. Breath of the Wild received universal acclaim from critics, achieving a 97 on Metacritic, with the highest number of perfect scores of any game from any year. It won Game of the Year at every major outlet and award ceremony. It sold over 34 million copies, becoming the best-selling Zelda game ever. But more importantly, it became a landmark in gaming history, a reference point that every open-world game since has been compared to. Developers across the industry openly cite it as inspiration. Players who've never touched another Zelda game consider it one of the greatest games ever made. But why? What makes Breath of the Wild a masterpiece? What did Nintendo do differently that made this game transcend the open-world genre and establish entirely new standards? Today, we're going to explore the design philosophy, the technical innovations, and the artistic vision that transformed Breath of the Wild from a risky departure for the Zelda franchise into one of the most influential games ever created. The story of Breath of the Wild's brilliance starts with a single, radical decision: throw away the Zelda formula. For decades, Zelda games followed a predictable structure. You'd start in a small area, venture into the first dungeon to get an item, use that item to access new areas, find the next dungeon to get the next item, and repeat this pattern until facing the final boss. This formula worked. It produced classics like Ocarina of Time and A Link to the Past. But it also became restrictive, predictable, and increasingly dated as open-world games evolved. Director Hidemaru Fujibayashi and producer Eiji Aonuma made a conscious decision to break conventions. They looked at what made the original 1986 Legend of Zelda special, the sense of exploration, the freedom to tackle challenges in any order, the thrill of discovery, and asked themselves, how do we recreate that feeling with modern technology? The answer was to abandon the item gating system entirely and build a world where the player's creativity, not their inventory, determined what was possible. This philosophy manifests in the game's opening. After a brief tutorial area on the Great Plateau, you receive the paraglider and the entire world opens up. You can see Hyrule Castle in the distance, glowing with Ganon's malevolent energy. And here's the revolutionary part. You can go there immediately if you want. You could attempt to fight Ganon within hours of starting the game. Nothing stops you. No invisible walls, no items you need first, no arbitrary level requirements. The game trusts you to decide your own path. This trust extends to every aspect of the design. The 4 divine beasts, the game's equivalent of traditional dungeons, can be tackled in any order. You could complete all 4, some of them, or none at all before facing Ganon. Every shrine, every side quest, every piece of content is optional. The game provides objectives and guidance, but it never forces you down a specific path. This creates a fundamentally different relationship between player and game compared to most open-world titles. Most open-world games give you freedom within structure. You can go anywhere, but the main quest still funnels you from location A to B to C. Side content exists separately from critical path progression. Breath of the Wild obliterates these boundaries. Exploration isn't a distraction from the main quest, it is the main quest. The game's structure acknowledges that every player will have a unique journey through Hyrule, discovering things in different orders, prioritizing different objectives, and creating their own personal narrative. But freedom without purpose creates empty sandboxes. What makes Breath of the Wild exceptional is how it fills that freedom with meaningful discovery. This brings us to the game's core design philosophy, articulated perfectly by critics who've analyzed the game extensively. Everything in Breath of the Wild has a purpose, and nothing you do is a pointless time sink. Every activity, from collecting Korok seeds to cooking meals to climbing mountains, connects to the larger systems that govern your adventure. Take Korok seeds as an example. When you first encounter these collectibles, hidden throughout Hyrule in clever puzzles and environmental secrets, you might think they're just another collectathon, like collecting flags in Assassin's Creed or finding audio logs in BioShock. But Korok seeds serve a crucial function. They expand your inventory space through the character Hestu. More inventory means more weapons, more shields, more bows. This directly impacts your ability to engage with combat encounters and adapt to different situations. But the genius extends beyond the reward. Finding Korok seeds requires observation and puzzle solving. Some are hidden under rocks on mountain peaks. Others appear when you complete rings of lily pads on water. Some require shooting balloons, throwing rocks into circles, or matching patterns of stones. These puzzles teach you to observe your environment, to notice anomalies, to question why things look a certain way. The game is teaching you to be curious, and it's doing so through gameplay rather than tutorials. This philosophy of purposeful design permeates everything. Cooking isn't just a crafting system, it's your primary survival tool and a creative outlet. The game never explicitly tells you what ingredients combine to create specific effects, encouraging experimentation. Players discover that hearty ingredients fully restore health and provide bonus hearts. They learn that cooking multiple ingredients of the same type creates stronger effects. The cooking system rewards curiosity and punishes carelessness, creating a loop where you're constantly gathering ingredients, experimenting with combinations, and discovering new recipes. The shrines exemplify this design philosophy perfectly. There are 120 shrines scattered throughout Hyrule, each containing a puzzle or combat challenge. On the surface, they're progress gates. You need spirit orbs from shrines to upgrade your hearts and stamina. But shrines serve multiple functions simultaneously. They're fast travel points, turning the massive map into a navigable space. They're teaching tools, introducing physics concepts and mechanical interactions you'll use in the open world. They're rewards for exploration, often hidden in clever locations that require creative thinking to reach. And they provide pacing, breaking up exploration with focused challenges. What separates Breath of the Wild from other open-world games is how these systems interconnect. In many open-world titles, different activities feel disconnected. Combat is separate from traversal. Crafting is separate from exploration. Breath of the Wild creates a web of interconnected systems where everything affects everything else.
The weather system demonstrates this brilliantly. Rain makes surfaces slippery, affecting climbing. It also douses fires, affecting cooking and combat. But rain creates opportunities too, filling empty ponds with water, making certain fish easier to catch, and creating updrafts under overhangs that let you reach new areas. The chemistry engine, as Nintendo calls it, creates countless interactions between objects, elements, and physics. Metal conducts electricity, making metal weapons dangerous in thunderstorms, but useful for drawing lightning to enemies. Fire spreads through grass, creating tactical opportunities in combat. Ice melts near heat sources, but can be created instantly with ice arrows. These aren't scripted interactions for specific puzzles, they're systemic rules that apply universally, creating what developers call emergent gameplay. Situations the designers never specifically planned for, but that arise naturally from systems interacting. This commitment to systemic design creates the game's most magical moments. A player discovers they can use a leaf to create wind currents. Another realizes they can freeze enemies solid with ice arrows, then shatter them with sledgehammers. Someone else figures out that metal boxes can be lifted with magnesis and dropped on enemies. These discoveries feel personal because the game never explicitly teaches them. You figured it out yourself by understanding the rules and experimenting with combinations. The world design deserves its own discussion because Hyrule in Breath of the Wild is arguably Nintendo's greatest achievement in environmental storytelling and level design. The map is massive, yet every square meter feels intentionally crafted. There's no procedural generation here, no repeated assets filling space. The development team, with assistance from Monolith Soft, the studio behind Xenoblade Chronicles, designed this world with obsessive attention to detail. The landscape itself serves as a navigational tool. Towers, mountains, and landmarks are carefully positioned to be visible from multiple vantage points, creating natural waypoints. When you climb high and look around, you instinctively spot interesting locations. A strange rock formation, a suspicious clearing, ruins half buried in sand. The game uses visual language to communicate points of interest without needing map markers or quest indicators. A column of smoke suggests cooking enemies. A cluster of trees in barren land might hide a shrine. Unusual geological features almost always reward investigation. This approach to world design comes from the development team's stated inspiration, childhood memories of exploring neighborhood mountains. Art director Satoru Takazawa and his team talked extensively about wanting to recreate the sense of adventure from climbing hills, encountering wild animals, and discovering mushrooms. They wanted grass that sways in the breeze and the beauty of nature detached from human activity. These aren't just aesthetic choices, they're design philosophy made manifest, creating a world that feels like a real place rather than a game level. The game's approach to teaching players how to engage with this world is revolutionary in its restraint. Most open-world games assault you with tutorials, UI elements, and objective markers. Your screen is cluttered with icons telling you where to go, what to do, what you can interact with. Breath of the Wild strips all of this away. The UI is minimal. There are no objective markers pointing you to your destination. The game describes locations through geography and expects you to navigate using landmarks and environmental observation. Quest design exemplifies this philosophy. When someone asks you to find a person or location, they don't place a marker on your map. They describe what the area looks like. Head east past the Twin Peaks, you'll find a waterfall. He's near the shrine glowing orange. You have to actually pay attention to your surroundings, recognize landmarks, and navigate using observation rather than following waypoints. This transforms navigating from mindless marker following into genuine wayfinding, engaging your spatial awareness and environmental observation. When the first time you encounter this, when Azora tells you to find Prince Sidon without marking where he is, you might feel frustrated. But then you spot the distinctive red figure standing on a cliff in the distance, exactly where the geography suggested he'd be. You realize the game is teaching you to look and think, rather than follow. This creates a different kind of engagement, one that makes you feel genuinely clever for solving navigation puzzles, rather than simply following instructions. This design philosophy extends to combat, which is more nuanced and creative than any previous Zelda game. The addition of perfect dodges triggering flurry rushes and perfect parries staggering enemies creates skill-based encounters where mastery is rewarded. But combat truly shines in how it integrates with the environment and physics systems. You can roll boulders down hills onto enemies. You can use updrafts from fires to gain aerial advantage. You can drop metal objects on enemies during thunderstorms. You can freeze enemies with ice arrows, then knock them off cliffs. The weapon durability system, controversial as it is, serves this design philosophy. By making every weapon temporary, the game forces you to constantly adapt, to use whatever tools are available rather than finding one preferred weapon and using it exclusively. This encourages engagement with the game's variety, pushing you to master different weapon types and discover creative solutions. A player comfortable with their setup won't experiment. A player forced to adapt will discover the depth hidden in the systems. But let's address something crucial. Breath of the Wild isn't just mechanically brilliant. It's artistically stunning in ways that transcend technical specifications. The game's art direction draws from multiple sources, most notably Studio Ghibli films and traditional Japanese aesthetics, but filter through Nintendo's expertise in creating timeless visual styles. The cel-shaded approach, reminiscent of Wind Waker but more refined, ensures the game ages gracefully. Even running on the relatively underpowered Switch hardware, Breath of the Wild looks beautiful because its aesthetic isn't about technical realism, but artistic cohesion. The music deserves special mention for what it doesn't do. Composer Manaka Kataoka made the bold choice to embrace minimalism, letting silence and ambient sounds dominate most exploration. When music does appear, it's subtle, often just piano notes that complement rather than overwhelm. This creates space for environmental sounds, the rustling of grass, the crackle of fire, the distant cry of enemies, to become part of the audio landscape. The restraint makes the moments when music swells, like when you face a guardian or enter Hyrule Castle, dramatically more impactful. The sound design extends this philosophy. Every action has satisfying audio feedback. Collecting items produces distinct sounds, different surfaces create different footstep noises, weapons have unique audio signatures. The opening voice line from Zelda, "Open your eyes," can send chills down your spine. This attention to audio detail creates subconscious engagement, making the world feel tangible and responsive even when you're not consciously thinking about it. Now let's discuss the game's influence on the industry. Because Breath of the Wild didn't just succeed commercially and critically, it fundamentally changed how developers approach open-world design. Since its release, countless games have tried to capture its magic.
Genshin Impact built its entire foundation on Breath of the Wild's climbing and gliding systems. Elden Ring's approach to open-world design, emphasizing discovery over direction, draws clear inspiration from Zelda. Even Ubisoft, the company that defined the checklist-driven open-world formula, has publicly discussed learning from Breath of the Wild's approach. The game proved that players don't need their hands held. They don't need markers for every objective. They don't need tutorials explaining every mechanic. Given a coherent world with consistent rules, players will figure things out themselves, and that discovery feels more rewarding than any guided experience. This philosophy flies in the face of decades of conventional wisdom about accessibility and player guidance. Yet, Breath of the Wild became one of the best-selling and most beloved games ever made. The critical consensus around Breath of the Wild is nearly unprecedented. Multiple publications called it a masterclass in open-world design, a masterpiece, a landmark achievement. IGN described it as a magnificent sandbox full of mystery and wonder. GameSpot called it both a return to form and a leap into uncharted territory. These aren't hyperbolic marketing quotes. They're genuine attempts to articulate why this game feels special in ways that transcend typical review criteria. The accolades support this assessment. Game of the Year at the Game Awards, DICE Awards, and virtually every major publication topped 18 lists of the decade's best games according to Metacritic, more than any other 2010s title. Named one of the greatest games of all time by The Guardian, IGN, Edge, and Famitsu. In a 2023 GQ poll surveying journalists across the industry, Breath of the Wild was ranked as the best video game. This isn't recency bias or fanboy enthusiasm. This is industry-wide recognition that something extraordinary happened here. But accolades and sales don't fully explain why Breath of the Wild is a masterpiece. The real answer lies in something more intangible, the feeling of adventure it creates. There's a specific emotional experience that Breath of the Wild provides that few games have ever captured. It's the feeling of standing on the Great Plateau, looking out over Hyrule for the first time, seeing mountains and forests and ruins stretching to the horizon, knowing you can go anywhere. It's the excitement of spotting something interesting in the distance and detouring to investigate. It's the satisfaction of solving an environmental puzzle through observation and creativity. It's the joy of discovering something the game never told you about. This feeling, this sense of genuine adventure and discovery, is what the original Legend of Zelda provided in 1986. It's what countless games have tried and failed to recapture. Breath of the Wild achieves it by trusting players, by creating a world governed by consistent rules rather than scripted events, by rewarding curiosity over objective completion. The game respects your intelligence, your time, and your agency in ways that feel increasingly rare in modern gaming. There's also something to be said for how the game handles failure and difficulty. Breath of the Wild can be brutally challenging, especially early on. You'll die frequently, often to things you didn't see coming, but death is never punishing. The game auto-saves constantly, so you rarely lose more than a minute of progress. Each death is a lesson, teaching you something about the world's rules or your own capabilities. The game creates a safe space for experimentation, where failure is expected and informative rather than frustrating and punishing. This ties into the game's greatest achievement. It makes you feel clever. Not because it's easy, but because it gives you tools and trusts you to figure out how to use them. When you solve a puzzle through creative use of physics, when you defeat a tough enemy using environmental hazards, When you navigate to a location using only landmarks, you feel smart. The game's systems are complex enough to enable creativity, but consistent enough to be understood. This balance between depth and comprehensibility is extraordinarily difficult to achieve, yet Breath of the Wild makes it look effortless. The game's legacy is already secure. It's influenced not just open-world games, but game design more broadly. Developers across genres cite it as teaching them about player agency, environmental storytelling, and systemic design. It proved that Nintendo, often dismissed as out of touch with modern gaming, could create something that makes industry leaders look outdated. It showed that innovation doesn't require massive budgets or cutting-edge technology, just clear vision and masterful execution. But perhaps most importantly, Breath of the Wild reminded the industry and players what games can be at their best. Games that respect players, games that prioritize discovery over direction, games that create worlds worth exploring rather than checklists worth completing. Games that trust players to create their own stories within carefully crafted systems. Games that feel like adventures rather than tasks. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is a masterpiece not because it does one thing perfectly, but because it does everything coherently. The freedom, the physics systems, the world design, the minimalist UI, the environmental storytelling, the combat depth, the artistic vision, the audio design, every element supports and enhances every other element. There's no fat, no filler, no content included just to pad playtime. Everything serves the core experience of adventuring through Hyrule. This is what separates good games from masterpieces. Good games have great mechanics or compelling stories or beautiful visuals. Masterpieces have a unified vision where every element exists in service of a singular goal. For Breath of the Wild, that goal is creating the sense of adventure that made players fall in love with games in the first place. The feeling that the world is full of mysteries waiting to be discovered, that anything could be over the next hill, that your curiosity will always be rewarded. 7 years after release, Breath of the Wild remains fresh. Players still discover new interactions, new solutions, new secrets. The speedrunning community continues finding innovative techniques. Casual players return to Hyrule for the sheer joy of existing in that world. This longevity comes from design that's fundamentally sound rather than technically impressive. The game doesn't rely on graphical fidelity that will age poorly or mechanics that will be surpassed. It relies on principles of good design that are timeless. So, why is Breath of the Wild a masterpiece? Because it solved problems that had plagued open-world games for decades. Because it trusted players in ways games rarely do. Because it created a world that feels alive and worth exploring. Because it proved that freedom and structure aren't opposites, but complementary elements. Because it reminded the industry that innovation comes from understanding what makes experiences meaningful, not from following established formulas. But most of all, Breath of the Wild is a masterpiece because it captures something magical and rare in gaming. The sense that you're on a real adventure, exploring an actual place, making genuine discoveries. That feeling, that ineffable quality that makes you want to see what's over the next hill after hundreds of hours, is what elevates Breath of the Wild from merely excellent to truly transcendent. It's not just one of the greatest games ever made, it's proof of what games can achieve when vision, execution, and trust in players align perfectly. That's why Breath of the Wild is a masterpiece. And that's why years from now, people will still be studying it, learning from it, and chasing the standard it established.